difficult things that a commander, or difficult challenges that a commander has to face, is not to get involved when it is inappropriate to do so, but to ensure that the operation is managed safely whilst the problem is being resolved. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. So if you have something like this, problem, neon lights, fly the aircraft, then to start with, the operation will be kept safe. And all things being equal, then he will get to fly the aeroplane. He will get to monitor the air traffic control if we're on the ground. He'll get to do the RT if we're in the air. Flying the aeroplane through the autopilot, of course, assuming it's available. Then the next thing we're going to do is to make it safe. And by that, I mean if there's been a degradation of airworthiness, chances are there will be a checklist. And if we do the correct checklist and do it pedantically, which is something that we're going to talk about in a little while, then we will reduce the impact of that degradation of airworthiness on our operation. The next thing is to keep it safe. And here is usually where things go astray. Keep it safe. Now, I never have been of the view that the flight deck is a place for democracy. I call it a benevolent autocracy. In other words, I'm chairman of the board and my decision will be final. But I am interested in making the best possible decision that I can, and therefore I want to create an environment where everybody feel that they can put their two pennies in. So I get the best decision given the knowledge of the situation that is available at the time. The Air Navigation Order says that a person shall not recklessly or negligently endanger an aeroplane. It therefore seems to me that in law it is absolutely incumbent on the commander to ascertain whether, given the degradation of airworthiness of the aeroplane or whatever other problem I'm faced with, continued safe flight is an option. Because if I continue the flight and it isn't safe, and I should have known that given my experience and my expertise, then I am acting negligently. If I take the view, oh well, we'll give it a whirl and see whether we can get away with it, then I'm acting recklessly. A person shall not recklessly or negligently endanger an aeroplane. Therefore, at our board meeting, we are going to discuss together the ramifications of this degradation of airworthiness. Now, to make it simple, I always use the example on a 4-engine aeroplane. We've watched the oil running out of number 3 engine. We finally shut it down through oil pressure starter for 10 from Colonies. Well, we know why we shut it down. The chances of ancillary or collateral damage almost nil. I propose that we can continue flying this aeroplane for as long as we've got fuel to do it. Situation 2 is an enormous great big bang, big swing. We shut the engine down because it's exploded. Starter for 10, don't know what's gone on out there. There may be collateral damage. Don't think we should be flying this any further than we have to. Third scenario, fire engine checklist. It's a fire out there. We've shut the engine down, started for 10, absolutely no idea what's going on up there. There may well be ongoing damage. Let's get this thing on the ground as soonest. So in my conversation with BA, and note where it comes after we've had our board meeting, not before. In the first instance, it will be, we've had this oil problem, shut the engine down, looks as though we can make destination, would you like us to have a go? Answer, yes please. Okay, we'll do it. Second scenario may be, right, we've had this engine, it's blown up. I'm going to be able to put it anywhere on the eastern seaboard because the weather's fine along the eastern seaboard there, but I ain't taking it to Chicago. Where would you like it? I'll take it to Montreal, please. Okay, done. Third scenario, C and Shannon. Because it is this guy, who is responsible, you as commander, who is responsible for the safe operation of the aircraft. And if you are making the best possible professional decision for the safe operation of the aircraft, given the degradation of airworthiness that has happened to you, given the information that you've got available at the time, nobody can criticise you. No use at all to me that when I've got on the ground, the engineers look at the back of the engine turbine that isn't there anymore and say, oh, well, it was a contained engine failure, Captain. Because at 35,000 feet, I don't know that. Now, I'm trying to put things in a way in which you can understand where the flight continuation policy of British Airways comes in Collins' thinking. It comes absolutely because I'm always going to do what's best for BA, given that it is safe to do so. Because what's best for BA is certainly not endangering the rest of the flight, given the circumstances of this particular degradation of airworthiness. You know, it grieves me that we gave out hearts and flowers to a crew that brought home a classic years ago when they had an engine failure out of Delhi, when we know chances are if they'd lost the second engine we'd have lost the aeroplane. Okay? And engine failures are easy to talk about. And of course it's always much more complex than that, in that they aren't engine failures, they're other things. Faced with a problem, have a disciplined approach to dealing with it. Collins is fly the aircraft, make it safe, keep it safe, then do what's best for BA. Something happens and there's more than the two of us on the flight deck, then there's nothing like the third and fourth guy would like to do but to get involved. Shall I ring Maindrill? Absolutely not. British Airways will not come into my flight deck until such time as we have done the processes that are necessary to keep the operation safe and to make a sensible decision about what we are prepared to do given the problem that we have. So at this point I usually include a cautionary tale about how communications that have improved so dramatically over time can actually sometimes work against you. And the prime example always comes to mind. You may well know that years ago a crew in Bombay took a Classic and tried to bump start it. And in days of yore, the engine on the Classic, the older engines on the Classic, were very prone to hot starting if there was any form of tailwind at all. And so if you had a problem starter, then you'd start the others and then taxi the aeroplane into wind and get a little bit of headwind, and usually that would cause the problem. This particular crew one night had a problem in Bombay and they couldn't get an engine started because of this problem. They contacted Maintrol and Maintrol said, oh, well, there's a procedure for this. You need to get some airflow going through the engine. So why don't you take it onto the runway and run it down the runway and start it on the roll? Now, here were three intelligent, well-trained individuals, captain, co-pilot and flight engineer, and given that information, they got on the end of 27 at Bombay and they ran it down the runway. Of course, didn't start the engine, but nearly wrecked the aeroplane, because it cost them 16 wheels and 16 brakes when they came to a shuddering halt at the end, fortunately, the end before they hit the water. More recent example, 747-400 climbing out of London, the flaps control message. So they do the checklist, get the flaps up. They get on to main control, and main control say, yeah, that was a fix for this. What you do is you get the arm switch for the alternate flaps and you recycle it. Problem is that when you recycle the arm switch and the flaps control unit wake up, they say to them, so why did we last see the flaps? And in this case, they last saw the flaps when the flaps were at 20 and the guys are now doing 350 knots. Now, the moral in this tale is the guys in main control are hugely helpful, they're very skilled, they've got access to a tremendous amount of technical information. But the way you use it, the way I use it, needs to reflect the fact that it is me and you who are responsible for the safe operation of the aircraft. Therefore, as a general rule, in Collins' aeroplane, if it ain't in the QRH, it ain't going to get done. If it's not in the QRH, then it doesn't get done. Now, that does not mean to say that I won't ring up main control and say, look, we've got this huge buzzing downstairs by door 2. Can you help me so I can see whether we can troubleshoot this so we can get the problem fixed when we arrive in Singapore? And they'll say something like, oh, there's the equipment cooling fans down there. Why don't you go down there and turn the fan off momentarily and see if the noise goes? Answer, yes it does. Right, we've troubleshot it. Now we can put it in the technical log. We've told main control, they've set up engineering in Singapore, and the problem gets fixed. That's an ideal way of using main control. We've got an IFE problem. Is there a fix? Yes, there is a fix, and they'll talk us through it, and providing it's sensible to do so, not a problem. But pulling circuit breakers on systems that I don't understand in flight, or I don't understand the ramifications of when I'm in flight, is not something I would do. Choose something. Flight control computer, circuit breakers. No problem turning it off. What happens when you turn it back on again? What happens if it slaps the control? Breaks the tail off. I don't know. So it's not going to be done. So cautionary tale. Information to you in flight, with an aircraft in flight, is just that, because you, as commander, you, and only you, have the responsibility for the safe operation of the aircraft. And to that end, we've got any number of examples where well-intentioned advice is always well-intentioned, has made matters worse. So, main control is there as a huge support system for you, but use it advisedly. Use it advisedly. Okay, we said that we'd come back to the issue of handling the QRH. Time spent on diagnosis, never wasted. Getting the correct checklist, absolutely vital. Reading it pedantically can't be overstated. So let's just review a couple of things together. So, in the normal course of events, most of our checklists are driven by an ICAS title. So let's say bleed, duct, leak, left came up on our ICAS. Bleed, duct, leak, left. Now it wouldn't actually come up initially. What would have come up was a pop-up because there was a bleed, duct, leak, showing that the air in the bleed had dropped below a certain value. The air pressure in the duct had dropped. The chances are that would have caused a cargo det error in the 747 because there's insufficient air going across the smoke detectors in the cargo department. And finally, when the heat sensors, because they're heat sensors in the duct, had heated up enough with hot air, it would have brought bleed, duct, leak, left up. In this case, if the leak was in the left-hand side of the duct. So, the good commander has a choice. He can either say bleed, duct, leak, left checklist, please, or he can say you have control, you fly the airplane, you take the RT, and I will do the bleed, duct, leak, left checklist. And I'm going to try to explain why that is my preferred course of action. And the reason is this, that if you turn up the bleed, duct, leak, left checklist, which I haven't picked this one out, in the QRH in the 747, it will say bleed, duct, leak, left, centre, right. And if we do it properly, we will compare the title on the QRH with the ICAS, and we will agree it's the bleed, duct, leak, left checklist that we're going to do. And then what usually happens is the guy who's going to read it will take the checklist up here, i.e. out of sight of the other guy. And the first thing he comes to when he comes down past the descriptor box is, fun enough, the bleed, duct, leak, centre checklist. It's back to front. And how many people out of 10 in a simulator, if they're getting this as a loft exercise, i.e. unannounced, do you think will read that checklist instead of the correct one? Well, I have to tell you that it's at least 3 or 4 out of 10. It's very easy to do. Confirmation bias. You've seen the list left, right, centre, or left, centre, right, can't remember off the top of my head, but the first thing you come to is the bleed, duct, leak, centre checklist. And you don't read it properly, you've got confirmation bias there or whatever, and you read the wrong checklist. Now, very, very important. Not only is it important to check that the correct title conforms between the ICAS and the checklist, but also that you are doing the correct checklist within the QRH box. Do the correct checklist. The next thing that I want to try to draw out is how important it is to do it absolutely pedantically, and how on modern high technology airplanes, when you pick this QRH up so rarely, it's very easy to get it wrong. So you're going to do the correct checklist, and you're going to do it pedantically. And the reason that I'm going to read it is that I want to ensure that nobody moves a switch, and so we're absolutely certain it's the correct one. Now, if he's running the checklist, then he may or may not wait for me to confirm it's the right one, whereas I can force the discipline. So that's another reason why I will be reading it, all things being equal. Now, we're going to do each item on the checklist, and at some point or other we will come to a decision point. I've got ahead of myself because I've drawn 2 boxes, but on the 747 a decision point is indicated by a box. And the decision point is an opportunity to go up one branch of the tree or another, sometimes a third, rarely a third, but only one. And the decision that you make at that point is as important as getting the correct checklist in the first place. And so it's, if you like, as important that you have the appropriate debate at that point, at each and every one of those points, as you had in getting the first checklist right. And you're going to have chosen a branch of that decision tree, and you're going to go up it until it either says checklist complete, or it brings you down to another decision where once again you're going to choose one branch or another, never both. Now, just to illustrate how easy it is to make a mistake, I use the auto start checklist. And I'll say to the guys, right, we're starting number 3 engine, and it says engine 3 auto start engine 3. Again, not to hand, can't remember, one or the other. Auto start engine 3. So what do we do? Well, the memory items say that the fuel control switch goes to cut off, the start switch goes in, and the auto start switch goes off. Question: what does switching the auto start switch off do to engine 3 auto start? Answer: it turns it off, because it's part of the auto start system and you've just turned it off. So up on your iPads here, engine 3 auto start turned into auto start off. When you read the QRH, which is the next thing we're going to do to confirm the memory items, it says in the box, fuel control switch cut off, start switch in, auto start switch off, auto start off carotid message is displayed. Then it goes on to offer a box. And it says if engine 3 auto start was displayed, was is underlined, we do this. If start aborted manually, do that. Now, guess how many people will fail to read and understand if auto start message was displayed? And they read it if auto start message displayed. Oh no, it's not displayed. And because we did some things, we put the fuel control switch to cut off, we put the start switch in, the auto start switch off, thinks we aborted the start manually. No, we didn't. But they're then on this branch of the tree and it's wrong. And in the cold light of day, you can see, oh, how stupid that was. But it isn't stupid at all, it's just a function of the inbuilt traps, if you like, because it's so easy to read what you think is there rather than what is there. And that one branch of the tree or another seems more attractive, more seductive to go down than the actual one. And what usually happens on this occasion is that you start off going down the wrong track, recognise that it's the wrong track, and then start going up that one. And now we really have screwed it up. Doing the correct checklist, doing it absolutely pedantically, making sure that at a decision point the correct decision is being made, and then sticking with the branch of that decision tree until you either get to checklist complete or another decision point. These are basic disciplines of handling a checklist. And if you think about it, they only ever get practiced normally in the simulator. What I'm saying to you is that it's very easy indeed to get it wrong. So you need to put in place some form of preventative action so that you don't get suckered into making a mistake with a QRH, which will make a bad situation worse, or any situation less good. Being pedantic with a checklist, just as valuable as that time that you spent on diagnosis. Okay, this is the point where we usually go to lunch in the day, and I try to bring some threads together at this point as a summary. And the summary really is a potpourri of what we have discussed together. Knowledge of emergency checklists, and particularly those with memory items, has to be a given. Has to be a given. Your ability to pull them out of random access memory without fail, correctly, at any time, day or night, is a necessary part of any pilot's skills and abilities, but particularly yours, Commander, particularly yours. Having a methodology of ensuring that you stay on track, you manage the operation in a way that when you look back on it, you will be pleased with yourself, as against having to unravel the threads when you've made a cock-up. Seems to me to make just good sense. Collins, fly the aeroplane, make it safe, keep it safe, do what's best for BA. It's simple, it's there in neon lights, and it has gotten me out of trouble many, many times. Many, many times. Because we are can-do, will-do people. Something's not been happening, then we'll just get on and do it. But if I'm getting on to doing that, I'm not doing my job as commander. Years ago, there was some discussion when with the development of the Trident, the captain should actually sit in the P3 seat. And God, it never happened. But the thinking, funnily, the thinking was sound. The captain is there to manage the show. He's got other people who can do things for him. The driving of the aeroplane, let's say, in this circumstance. Having a methodology that will work for you, is very, very important. Be alive to the traps that are laid out for you. Nobody intentionally lays traps out, but they're there. If you've got an operations manual that stretches to 29 volumes, it's hardly surprising that there'll be information in one part that's contradictory to another. Or the way in which it was written was clear to the guy who wrote it, but is not necessarily clear to you who are reading it. Be alive to the traps. Have some sort of backstop to try to stop you falling down a hole. Recognise that not all checklists are driven by an ICAS warning or caution. On the 747, I'll ask the guys, what are the flap checklists? And they'll say, flaps drive, flaps control, flaps primary, and that's it. And then I'll say, well, what's the fourth one? And the fourth one is that the flaps indication disagree. And it's a complicated checklist, and it lies there without an associated ICAS. Therefore, it seems to me that a prudent commander should know that there are these checklists are designed by the manufacturer to keep me out of trouble given certain circumstances that will not be brought to my attention by the ICAS, which means to say that from time to time I will review the titles on all of the checklists to make sure that I'm keeping up to date with the fact that not only some of them might change, but also that I'm refreshing my knowledge of what is in the QRH. Now, I've said before and I'm going to say it again, much of the skills of a good commander are not practiced in the aeroplane, they're practiced in the bath, driving to work, in the quiet of a study. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. If you know what's in those QRHs, funnily enough, when things get thrown at your left base, it's just another thing that you will handle. An approach to that way of thinking is something that will stand you in good stead forevermore. I usually tell a funny story at this point, and I'd like to share it with you in that I was brought up in BOEC and long haul, which meant that you didn't get a sector very often, and if you did, it was stuck to you with super glue. It didn't matter whether the airplane was breaking up underneath you. You got to fly the aeroplane, manage it, do the checklist, sweep the flight deck at the same time. So when the concept of crew resource management came along, cockpit resource management as it was called initially, and I was introduced to this, I thought this is brilliant. The whole approach of being able to share the workload seemed to me to make great good sense. And so I said to myself, well, the next time I'm faced with an emergency, then I'm going to give control to my co-pilot and I will manage the problem. Well, years went by and the first real emergency that I was faced with happened on a Classic when the co-pilot's radar caught fire. On the Classic, the co-pilot's radar was down by his right knee. So I said, "You have control, Bloggs." "Fuck off," he said as he was climbing over the pedestal into the engineer's lap. And of course, the illustration or moral of the story is that you cannot ever pre-plan emergencies. But you can have routines and disciplines that, if you like, are on the shelf, so that you can pull off the one that most suits the situation when it's presented to you unannounced. Well, this is usually the great graveyard shift after lunch. I use it to try to bring alive, turn words into pictures if you like, the things that I found that are useful to me operationally when thinking about the safe operation of the aircraft or operating in accordance with standard operating procedures. And in many respects, with apologies to those of you that have been to the States more times than I have, but things American, sometimes, even for those people who've often been to New York, Boston or wherever, are in some way confused. And so, to start with, let us recognise that we operate British registered aircraft that are operated by a company that has an air operator certificate issued by the Civil Aviation Authority of the United Kingdom and are operated in accordance with the Air Navigation Order. And this means to say that under the ICAO Convention, if you like, the Americans led everybody to the table to get them to sign up, and that ICAO Convention essentially says that an operator of a foreign country operates under the rules of that country even though they are flying elsewhere in the world. And the Americans haven't got everybody to sign up and file the most differences from it. Well, that's the way it sometimes seems. Now, unless you're going to fly light aircraft in the States, you do not have to be armed with Federal Aviation Regulations or the Airman's Information Manual, because British Airways is an approved operator in the States, which means to say that everything you need to operate in accordance with the requirements of the Americans is contained in our British Airways Operations Manual. It has to be. So if it's not there, it doesn't count. That is why you'll find things like the alternate weather minima in our Operations Manual. That is why you will find in our Operations Manual and the Route Information Manual an instruction that informs you that your call sign changes from Speedbird 175 to the Speedbird 175 Heavy in Canada to the Speedbird 175 Heavy when you're in the USA, and so on and so forth. But it's quite useful to recognise some of the things that are around in the States that that you come across day to day, but if they weren't or haven't been brought directly to your attention, they might just have passed by. Did you know, for instance, that the ATIS, which is usually timed at the 11:50 hours weather, is so that the ATIS can go out, i.e. the letter changes on the hour. So unless the weather is such that they are putting out specials, when it will be the 11:22 hours special weather, the ATIS changes on the hour. Secondly, that unless you're at an airport that specifically says something different, Boston comes to mind, your clearance for departure is available at your estimated time of departure minus 30 minutes, not minus 31, minus 30. And it comes up on their computer, which can be quite useful to you because that's usually the time when you're doing your pre-flight checks. And you will know, when you've got your clearance, what SID you can expect. Speedbird 175, you're clear to land. What does clear to land mean? Well, it means in the States that you can come visit us. It does not mean to say that the runway is clear to land on. And it means that in the States they operate a positive go-round command. In other words, if you're told to go round, never doubt it, go round. Because actually the runway has something on it. That go-round instruction in the States will include what to do in all likelihood. Because as you know, I'm sure, if you started off on an ILS approach into a runway in the States and they said, can you see the runway? And you say yes, and they say cleared visual approach, runway 13, that has changed your go-around profile. And a go-around profile from a visual approach is climb straight ahead to pattern altitude. Well, unless you're familiar with San Francisco or LA or New York, you won't know what the pattern altitude is. So if they tell you to go around, it will include the climb instruction to a given altitude. If you need to go around, perhaps because you blocked the landing, let's say, then you need to get a request in quick to find out where you're going to stop the climb on the go-round. Clear to land, come visit us. Why do they say on the ATIS, please use the assigned runway? Well, because unlike in Europe, when the air traffic controllers will look out and see which way the wind's blowing and therefore choose the appropriate runway, in the States, runways are controlled by the Port Authority. And the Port Authority are not interested in which way the wind is blowing, they are interested in noise abatement. Therefore, to give you an example, on one occasion I came into New York, the first New York, the day of Cirrus fuel, Saw fuel as it was then. Eastern seaboard had gone out in snow, so I had to divert. Gassed it up, was first in the queue to get back into New York. Offered 04 right, and as I'm trundling down, I said, what did he say the wind was? He said, the wind's 310 at 15 knots. So I broke off, said, no way. I need 31 left or 31 right. They said, okay, speedbird come round, land on 31 left. When we landed on 31 left, he said, thanks speedbird, we were looking for a runway change. And that was the first time it came down to sort of, if you like, clear issues of the runway in use was down to me, the commander, to choose the best runway for the operation. Contaminated runway, it was no brainer. Please use the assigned runway, brackets for noise abatement reasons. If it isn't operationally suitable, don't use it. Use another one. What does it mean if, when air traffic control says to you, speedbird, there's a 737 at 11 o'clock passing left to right, and you say, I see him. If you say, I see him, you have taken responsibility for collision avoidance. If you say, I'm looking, air traffic control has responsibility for collision avoidance. It seems to me nuts, to be quite honest, to take on to my shoulders, or the shoulders of my crew, collision avoidance. And British Airways is going to pay the same nav charges whether I take a visual approach or whether I do an ILS approach. Whether we make use of those air traffic control services or we don't. So the response from Colin, to that 737 or traffic below or whatever, is I'm looking. And of course we may well spot it, great. But if I spotted it and told him, but I'd actually spotted the wrong aircraft and I got taken out, whose fault would that be? Colin's. So I don't do it. I don't do it. We've already had a discussion about being selfish with space and time, making sure that they provide me with a service, so that as a matter of course I will ask for an ILS or some form of instrument approach. Yeah, fine if it's a clear day and I'm now established on an intercept heading and I can see the runway and I'm happy and he's happy, well fine, I'll take a visual, but not until then. And as soon as I've accepted a visual approach, my go-round has changed. My go-round has changed. We mentioned that particularly in the States, because you're so close to Colorado, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 on the HF will give you a time check. They also have, apart from calling you a Speedbird 175 Heavy, they also have ways in which they will give you instructions. And very often they'll take you out on a heading and tell you to join the Victor 122. So if you haven't got a chart out with Victor 122 on, you won't know where you're going. So the Americans also will say something along the lines, pick up the 045 radial from XYZ and fly it inbound. If we're flying it inbound, it'll be 225 that we are tracking. 045 radial flight inbound. They'll say something. You don't often hold in the States, but when you do, it'll come at you quickly. They may say hold in your present position. Well, next time you are in the aeroplane or simulator, see if you can find the hold in the present position box on the FMC. If there's a hole in there, you'll have to go already, because you've already put in the arrival and that has a hole on the end of the go-around, then you'll have to go to next hold before you can find present position. Hitting present position, the aeroplane will start holding in that present position. Better still, they may say to you, hold as published, hold XYZ as published. Brilliant, got chart out, you can see the hold as published. But what they may well say is American, which says hold at XYZ northeast on the 045 radial. And that means you're going to hold that XYZ like that. Now the great thing is that it's an American box, the FMC, therefore it has a quadrant and radial box on the hold page, and if you put in what he says, hold northeast on the 045 radial, it will convert it to English as an inbound course on the appropriate page, left or right, as required on the line below. So if you're faced with a question mark in the flight deck when he says hold XYZ northeast on 045 radial, if you tell your mate to put in exactly what he heard on the quadrant and radial line, it will convert it to English. Holding doesn't happen very often in the States, but when it does, it happens in spades, because normally they're holding you linearly by use of speed and space, which the Americans have got a lot of generally within the various areas.